When you think of ancient Egypt, what comes to mind? Mighty pharaohs, towering pyramids, golden artifacts. But what about board games? It turns out the Egyptians weren't just master builders and astronomers. They were also incredible game designers, creating intricate pastimes that entertained kings and commoners alike for thousands of years. Imagine sitting under the starry desert sky, not just telling stories or gazing at monuments, but moving pieces on a beautifully carved board, laughing, strategizing, and connecting through play. These games weren't mere distractions, they were woven into the very fabric of daily life, religion, and even beliefs about the afterlife. Yet today, many of these brilliant creations have slipped into obscurity, waiting to be rediscovered. In this video, we're going to journey back in time to uncover these forgotten treasures. We'll explore how ancient Egyptians used games to teach strategy, settle disputes, and even communicate with the gods. You'll be amazed by the sophistication and beauty of these designs, some so engaging that they spread across the ancient world, from the banks of the Nile to the palaces of Mesopotamia. This isn't just about history, it's about human connection, creativity, and the universal love of play that transcends time and culture. You'll come away with a whole new appreciation for how our ancestors spent their leisure hours and what these games reveal about their values, fears, and dreams. So whether you're a history enthusiast, a board game lover, or just curious about the hidden corners of the ancient world, you're in for a treat. We'll dive into the rules, the artifacts, and the stories behind these incredible games, some of which you can even play today. Get ready to see ancient Egypt in a whole new light, not as a distant civilization frozen in time, but as a living, breathing culture full of fun, challenge, and imagination. Let's begin this adventure together. Among the many games unearthed from the sand of time, one stands out as the most iconic, Senet. This wasn't just a pastime, it was a profound spiritual exercise, a board game believed to hold the very key to eternal life. The name itself, Senet, translates to passing game or game of passing, a title that reveals its core purpose. This was a symbolic journey, a ritualized version of the soul's perilous voyage through the underworld known as the Duet. Egyptians believed that playing Senet in life was a form of practice, a way to rehearse for the most important challenge they would ever face after death. A typical Senet board was a beautiful object, often made of wood, ivory, or faience, and it featured 30 squares arranged in 3 neat rows of 10. But these weren't just blank spaces. The final 5 squares, in particular, were often marked with special hieroglyphs that represented the various blessings and obstacles one might encounter in the afterlife. A square might show the symbol for water, indicating a hazardous crossing, or feature a figure of the god Thoth, signifying divine assistance. The goal was to navigate your pieces, usually 5 or 7 cone-shaped pawns per player, off the board entirely, achieving the ultimate victory, rebirth into the afterlife. Movement was dictated not by modern dice, but by throwing sticks. These were 4 flat sticks, each painted on one side. Players would toss them into the air, and the number of painted sides that landed face up would determine how many squares a pawn could move. A roll of 1, 2, 3, or 4 all had distinct meanings, but a throw of 0 was also possible and carried its own strategic implications. This simple mechanic added an element of chance that mirrored the unpredictable nature of fate and the god's will. This deep spiritual connection is precisely why Senet boards were so commonly placed in tombs, nestled amongst the grave goods meant to accompany the deceased. It was considered an essential item for the journey, as crucial as food, jewelry, or protective amulets. Some of the most elaborate boards have been found in the tombs of pharaohs, like Tutankhamun, who was buried with no fewer than 4 Senet sets. Over centuries, the game's significance only grew. What might have started as simple entertainment evolved into a deeply religious object, with detailed instructions for the symbolic journey sometimes painted right on the coffin lids, guiding the soul through each square of the underworld. Reconstructing the exact rules of Senet has been a fascinating puzzle for Egyptologists, a challenge of connecting dots left across millennia. Unlike today's games that come with a printed rulebook, we have no ancient instruction manual for Senet. Instead, experts have had to become detectives, piecing together clues from tomb paintings, hieroglyphic inscriptions on coffin lids, and even from the physical boards and pieces themselves. This painstaking work has given us a very good, though not perfect, understanding of how the game was likely played, revealing a surprisingly modern blend of strategy and chance. The core movement was simple. You would toss your 4 throwing sticks to determine how many spaces to move one of your pawns, but the real depth and the game's spiritual symbolism emerged on the special squares. The board was a metaphorical map of the underworld, and landing on certain squares could either be a tremendous blessing or a devastating setback. For instance, landing on the square known as the House of Happiness was a safe haven, a place of rest. In stark contrast, the House of Water was a dreaded trap. This square often bore the hieroglyph for water, symbolizing the primordial waters of Nunt, a chaotic, dangerous force. Landing here meant you were swallowed by the abyss and had to go all the way back to start your arduous journey over, a clear parallel to the soul's fear of oblivion. Other squares offered more interactive and frankly ruthless gameplay mechanics. If you landed on a square already occupied by your opponent's piece, the 2 pieces swapped places. This could be a clever way to advance if you were behind. However, if you managed to land on a square with 2 of your opponent's pieces already on it, that formation created a blockade called a wa, and those pieces were protected and could not be touched. The most aggressive move was creating a row of 3 of your own pieces. This powerful formation allowed you to immediately remove any single opponent's piece from the board, sending it all the way back to the beginning to be reborn into the game. This act of sending an opponent back mirrored the dangers of the duet, where demons and deities could halt or reverse a soul's progress. This intricate dance of advancement and reversal is what made a single game of Senet such a lengthy and contemplative experience. It wasn't a quick race. It was a slow, strategic grind where fortunes could reverse with a single throw of the sticks. Players weren't just competing against each other, they were grappling with the whims of the gods, represented by the randomness of the throw. This combination of skill, chance, and profound spiritual metaphor transformed a simple board game into a ritual that could easily last for hours, serving as both a pastime and a solemn preparation for the ultimate journey every Egyptian knew they would one day undertake. Now, just as Senet offered a spiritual guide to the afterlife, another game provided a different kind of symbolic journey, one that has left archaeologists and historians utterly fascinated and deeply puzzled. This is Mehen, the Serpent game, and it stands as perhaps the most mysterious chapter in the story of ancient Egyptian play. Its board was a true masterpiece of design, a circular slab of stone or wood carved into the form of a coiled serpent, its body divided into a spiraling track of rectangular playing spaces, with the creature's head often depicted at the center. Unlike the long-lasting popularity of Senet, Mehen presents us with a profound historical riddle. It was incredibly popular for centuries, and then, around 300 BCE, it simply vanished from the archaeological record, disappearing without a trace. The game pieces used for Mehen are as distinctive as the board itself. Instead of simple cones or pawns, players moved small stone figures crafted in the shapes of lions and lionesses. A full set would typically include 3 to 6 of these fierce feline pieces for each player, along with a handful of smaller, round marbles or balls that likely served as additional token. We can only imagine the scene, players guiding their pride of stone lions along the serpent's coiled back, navigating the spiral path from the outer edge toward the head at the center. This imagery is powerfully evocative, suggesting a symbolic hunt or perhaps a mythological representation of the solar journey, with the lion, a creature associated with the sun god, battling or conquering the serpent, a symbol of chaos. But why did such a captivating and visually stunning game simply cease to exist? This is the central mystery of Mehen. Unlike Senet, which evolved and adapted for over 2 millennia, Mehen's presence in the historical record is abruptly cut short after the Old Kingdom period. One compelling theory suggests its disappearance was tied to a major religious revolution. The game's imagery is deeply connected to the sun god Ra and the protective serpent deity Mehen, for whom the game is named. As Egypt's religious beliefs and state-sponsored pantheon shifted over the centuries, the specific myths and deities associated with Mehen may have fallen out of favor, rendering the game's ritual purpose obsolete. It might have been seen as a relic of an older, outdated theology. Another possibility is that the game was a victim of its own complexity. The rules for Mehen, much like those for Senet, have been lost to time, and no texts describe how it was played. However, the unique pieces suggest a gameplay system that was significantly more intricate. Managing multiple lions and marbles on a spiraling track would have required a different kind of strategy, one that perhaps didn't resonate with changing taste. Maybe a newer, faster-paced game came along that captured the public's imagination, leading to Mehen being gradually abandoned and forgotten. Its fate is a stark reminder of how fragile cultural traditions can be. A pastime that entertained Egyptians for generations can be completely erased, leaving behind only beautiful silent artifacts that whisper of a lost world of play. To truly grasp the mystery of Mehen, we need to look at its namesake, the serpent deity himself. In Egyptian mythology, Mehen was a colossal, coiled snake god who served as a protector of the sun god Ra. Each night, as Ra journeyed his solar bark through the treacherous, 12-hour darkness of the underworld, he was besieged by the forces of chaos, most famously the great serpent Aseb, who sought to devour him and end the world. Wrapped around the bark and its divine occupant, Mehen formed a living, protective barrier, a shield against these existential threats. This vivid imagery provides a powerful parallel to the game's physical design. The circular, coiled board isn't just a convenient track. It's a direct representation of this protective deity, and the movement of the lion pieces across its body likely symbolize the celestial drama of this nightly voyage. The choice of lion-shaped game pieces is no less significant. Lions were potent symbols of power and protection in ancient Egypt, frequently associated with deities like Sekhmet, the fierce goddess of war and healing, and even with the pharaoh himself, who was often depicted as a sphinx, a lion with a human head. By moving these lions across the serpent's body, players weren't just racing to a finish line, they were likely reenacting a cosmic battle, perhaps taking on the role of protective spirits aiding Ra, or even representing the sun god's power, overcoming the chaotic forces embodied by the serpentine path itself. This transforms the game from simple entertainment into a participatory ritual, a way for people to engage with and perhaps influence the cosmic order from which their entire worldview was built. This deep religious connection offers the most compelling explanation for the game's sudden disappearance. The peak of Mehen's popularity coincided with the Old Kingdom, a period characterized by a certain set of religious beliefs centered heavily on the sun god and the divine authority of the pharaoh. However, following the collapse of the Old Kingdom, Egypt entered a period of political fragmentation and social upheaval known as the First Intermediate Period. This era saw a significant shift in religious focus. The once centralized state religion, with its grand cosmic myths, gave way to more personal and democratic forms of piety. People became less concerned with the pharaoh's journey to the stars and more focused on their own individual survival in the afterlife, a concern perfectly addressed by the increasingly popular game of Senet. Furthermore, burial practices evolved dramatically. Old Kingdom tombs were built for eternity, stocked with everything the deceased would need, including games for leisure and ritual. The game of Mehen, with its specific cosmic symbolism, was a standard part of this kit, but as time passed, the practice of placing full-sized board games in tombs declined. Instead, we see the rise of painted or carved representations of games on tomb walls or on the floors of burial chambers. This shift suggests a move from literal provision to symbolic representation. A painted Senet board on a coffin lid could magically serve the same purpose as a physical one, yet for reasons we may never fully understand, Mehen wasn't included in this new symbolic language. Its specific mythology may have been too tied to the old order, its ritual purpose lost in the changing tides of belief. It wasn't merely forgotten, it was intentionally left behind, a relic of a past theology that no longer spoke to the people or their new understanding of the universe and their place within it. While the spiritual journey of Senet and the cosmic mystery of Mehen offer profound glimpses into the Egyptian mindset, not all games were so deeply entangled with the afterlife. For a more lighthearted, yet no less competitive, experience, ancient Egyptians turned to a thrilling race game known to us today as Hounds and Jackals. The name comes directly from its most captivating feature, the playing pieces. These weren't simple pawns, but elegant, small pegs topped with exquisitely carved heads of dogs and jackals. Each player would have a set of 5 or 10 of these animal-headed pins, and the goal was a straightforward race to be the first to move all your pieces along a winding track and off the board. The game board itself was a masterpiece of woodworking, often fashioned from expensive ebony or ivory. Its surface was not painted with squares, but drilled with a series of 58 holes. These holes were arranged in a complex snaking path that created a truly engaging playing field. The track wasn't a simple loop. It featured a central row of holes that branched out into 2 parallel, winding courses before converging again. This design forced players to navigate a shared path, creating opportunities for interaction, blocking, and clever tactical moves. To play, you would insert your elegant hound or jackal-headed peg into a hole, moving it forward along the route with each turn. We know this game was immensely popular across all levels of society because of where it appears. Beautifully crafted sets have been found in the tombs of high-ranking officials and pharaohs, crafted from the finest materials. But perhaps more tellingly, a famous painting in the tomb of the Middle Kingdom official Idi shows him and his wife engaged in an intense game of hounds and jackals, their concentration evident. This vivid scene tells us the game wasn't just a ritual object for the dead. It was a lively source of entertainment for the living, enjoyed by couples and friends as a way to pass the time and engage in friendly competition. The method of movement added a crucial element of chance to the strategic race. While we lack an ancient rulebook, historians believe players used a set of knuckle bones or throwing sticks, much like in Senet, to determine how many spaces a pin could advance. This blend of luck and skill made every game unpredictable and exciting. A fantastic roll could see a player's piece surge ahead, while a poor throw could leave them stranded, watching their opponent's jackals gain a lead. Some boards even feature a few special holes, often marked with hieroglyphs like the Nefer symbol, meaning good or beautiful. Landing on one of these likely granted a player a bonus, such as an extra turn or the ability to jump ahead, adding another layer of strategic depth to the frantic race. Interestingly, the origins of this beloved Egyptian pastime might not lie along the Nile at all. Archaeological evidence suggests a very similar game, with an identical board layout and peg-based pieces, was being played in Mesopotamia even earlier. This has led scholars to believe that Hounds and Jackals, or its precursor, was one of the earliest examples of a board game spreading across cultures through trade and contact. It represents a fascinating moment of cultural exchange in the ancient world, showing that the human desire for a fun, competitive game was a powerful force that could bridge civilization. The Egyptians likely adopted the core concept and then made it their own, infusing it with their own aesthetic sensibilities by crafting those iconic canine-headed pegs and integrating it seamlessly into their daily lives for pure, unadulterated enjoyment. While we don't have a complete ancient rulebook to reference, historians have pieced together a very plausible set of rules for hounds and jackals by studying the boards and pieces themselves. The race began with each player's pegs placed in their starting positions, likely at the base of the board. To determine movement, players would have used a randomizer, most probably a set of casting sticks or perhaps sheep knuckle bones, which function much like primitive dice. A throw would dictate how many holes a player could advance one of their pins. This element of chance meant that no two games were ever alike. A fantastic roll could send a single piece surging ahead on the path, while a series of poor throws could leave a player's entire pack of hounds lagging frustratingly behind. The real genius of the game, however, lay in its intricate track. This wasn't a simple linear path. The 58 holes were arranged in a clever, snaking course that forced constant strategic decision. For much of the game, players moved their pieces along a shared central track, which created direct competition for space. This is where the game transformed from a simple race into a tactical battle. If you landed on a hole already occupied by your opponent's piece, you might have been able to send them back to the start or swap positions, a punishing setback that could instantly change the lead. This interactive element added a delicious layer of risk and reward, forcing players to think carefully about which piece to move and when, balancing the desire to push a leading piece further ahead with the need to protect pieces that were vulnerable to being knocked back. The ultimate goal was to be the first player to successfully navigate all of your pieces along the entire winding route and off the board, but the path itself held surprises that could accelerate or hinder your progress. Some of the holes on these ancient boards are marked with special symbols, like the hieroglyph Nefer, which means good or beautiful. Landing on one of these blessed spaces likely granted a player a significant advantage, such as an extra turn, the ability to make a second move, or even a direct shortcut to a more advanced part of the board. Conversely, certain unmarked holes might have acted as hazards, perhaps requiring a player to lose a turn or move backwards. These special spaces elevated the game, ensuring that a lead was never completely safe, and that a comeback was always possible with a bit of luck and shrewd decision-making. This beautiful blend of random chance and meaningful player choice makes Hounds and Jackals feel strikingly modern. It's the ancient precursor to countless race games we still play today, from the classic frustration of Sorry to the strategic property trading of Monopoly. It required the same kind of flexible thinking, knowing when to play it safe and when to be aggressive, managing multiple pieces on the board at once, and always adapting your strategy based on the unpredictable rolls of the dice and the moves of your opponent. It was more than just a distraction. It was a dynamic social activity that brought people together for an experience filled with laughter, tension, and the universal thrill of friendly competition. Now, let's turn our attention to a game that truly highlights ancient Egypt's role in a vast network of cultural exchange. While many of their games were homegrown innovations, the Egyptians were also enthusiastic adopters and adapters of foreign ideas, and nowhere is this more evident than with Aseb, also known as the game of 20 squares. This wasn't just an Egyptian creation, it was an international sensation, a strategy game whose distinctive board, a pattern of 20 squares arranged in a unique, often lopsided configuration, has been found everywhere from the royal courts of pharaohs to the bustling merchant quarters of Mesopotamia and the palaces of the Indus Valley. This was the backgammon of the Bronze Age, a game that connected empires through the universal language of play. The board itself is immediately recognizable and quite different from the grids of Senet or the coil of Mehen. A standard Aseb board was divided into two distinct sections. On one side, you had a 3x4 grid of 12 squares, and attached to it was a longer, protruding row of 8 squares, often elegantly curved, creating a total of 20 playing spaces. These squares were frequently decorated with elaborate symbols, hieroglyphs, or intricate geometric patterns, especially on the more luxurious sets. The boards used by Egyptian nobility were true works of art, crafted from the finest materials like precious woods, ivory, and even gold leaf, transforming the game into a stunning display of wealth and status as much as a test of skill. The goal of Aseb was a thrilling race, much like Hounds and Jackals, but with a layer of tactical complexity that feels remarkably familiar to us today. Each player had a set of 5 to 7 pieces, and the objective was to move all of your pieces along the winding path of the 20 squares and off the board before your opponent could do the same. Movement was determined by casting lots or throwing dice. We have evidence of 6-sided dice being used in some regions, showing just how advanced their gaming tools were. This element of chance meant that a single lucky roll could dramatically shift the momentum of the entire game, but Aseb was far from a mere game of luck. The real depth, and its striking resemblance to modern backgammon, came from its interactive and often aggressive gameplay mechanics. The rules, reconstructed from cuneiform tablets found in Mesopotamia, reveal a game of sophisticated strategy. If you landed on a square occupied by a single opponent's piece, you could capture it, sending it back to the starting area and forcing your rival to waste precious turns re-entering it onto the board. However, if a player managed to place 2 of their own pieces on a single square, that square became a safe haven, a fortified point that could not be touched by the opponent. This simple rule created a brilliant tactical dynamic, forcing players to constantly weigh the risk of pushing a lone piece ahead against the defensive security of moving in pairs. This balance between bold offensive moves and careful defensive positioning is what makes the game so enduringly compelling. Players had to think several steps ahead, anticipating their opponent's throws and maneuvers while managing the constant uncertainty introduced by the dice. It was a perfect mirror for the unpredictable nature of life and fortune in the ancient world, where a successful trade mission or a political alliance could be upended by a sudden storm or a shift in power. The game's widespread popularity across different cultures suggests it was more than just entertainment. It was a tool for teaching strategic thinking, risk assessment, and diplomacy, skills that were invaluable to merchants, diplomats, and leaders alike. Aseb represents a fascinating chapter in history, showing us that even thousands of years ago, people from vastly different cultures were sitting down together, rolling dice, and engaging in a battle of wits that transcended language and borders. The discovery of identical Aseb boards across such a vast geographical area is one of history's most compelling clues to a deeply interconnected ancient world. Finding the same distinctive 20-square pattern etched into ivory in an Egyptian palace, carved into clay in a Mesopotamian city-state, and inscribed on stone in the ruins of a Mediterranean port isn't a coincidence. It's evidence of a vibrant network of exchange that moved ideas as freely as it moved spices, metals, and textile. This game was a passenger on the earliest trade routes, carried by merchants, diplomats, and soldiers who brought with them not just goods, but their culture, their leisure activities, and their ways of thinking. Aseb became a universal pastime among the elite precisely because it was a shared language of strategy and social interaction, a common ground where Egyptian vizier and a Mesopotamian merchant could sit down and engage in a familiar intellectual contest despite their different languages and gods. As the game traveled, it didn't remain static. It evolved, adapting to the tastes and beliefs of each culture that adopted it. In Mesopotamia, where the game was known as the Royal Game of we have the incredible fortune of actually having cuneiform tablets that detail the rules, giving us a clear picture of their version. Their boards often featured elaborate rosette squares and other symbols that likely held specific religious or astrological meanings within their own cosmology. The Egyptians, while adopting the core mechanics, made the game their own. They gave it the name Aseb and often incorporated their own hieroglyphic symbols onto the squares, perhaps infusing the gameplay with a layer of local meaning that resonated with their worldview. This process of localization is a testament to the game's flexibility. It provided a robust framework that different societies could decorate with their own cultural fingerprints, making it both internationally recognizable and personally meaningful. This cross-cultural journey offers us a unique window into the nature of ancient interaction that goes far beyond dry lists of traded commodities. The spread of Aseb tells a story of prolonged and intimate contact. This wasn't a case of a game design being briefly seen and copied. It was a concept that was deeply learned, played, and cherished across generations in multiple societies. This suggests that the people moving along these trade routes weren't just passing strangers. They were forming communities, spending enough time in foreign lands to teach their games to local friends and in turn learn new ones. A merchant waiting for his goods to be unloaded or a diplomat engaged in lengthy negotiations would have naturally turned to a board game to pass the time, inadvertently becoming an agent of cultural transmission. The game board itself became a social hub, a neutral space where people from different backgrounds could connect on a human level, building relationships that facilitated not just play, but also commerce and diplomacy. Ultimately, the humble Aseb board is a powerful reminder that globalization is not a modern invention. The Bronze Age world was surprisingly small, knitted together by networks of exchange that allowed a complex strategy game to become a common thread linking the great civilizations of the time. When we look at one of these ancient boards, we are not just looking at a game, we are looking at a map of human connection. We see the physical evidence of shared laughter, concentrated silence, and the friendly rivalry that once flourished in palaces and trading posts from the Nile to the Tigris and Euphrates. It shows us that beneath the grand narratives of wars and empires, people have always found ways to reach across cultural divides, to share experiences, and to find common ground in the universal desire for challenge, entertainment, and human connection. This incredible journey of games across the ancient world finds one of its most perfect examples in the relationship between Egypt's Aseb and the legendary royal game of from Mesopotamia. While we've been calling it Aseb in an Egyptian context, it's crucial to understand that this was essentially the same game, a shared cultural phenomenon that highlights just how interconnected these great civilizations truly were. The royal game of named for the spectacular boards discovered in the royal tombs of that ancient city, features the exact same 20-square layout we find in Egypt. This identical design is a silent but powerful testament to the bustling trade routes that crisscross the region, carrying not just spices and precious metals, but also ideas, stories, and entire forms of entertainment. The mechanics of these games were virtually interchangeable, creating a common ground for players from different empires. Both games used a combination of dice, whether tetrahedral knucklebones or the more familiar cubic dice, to determine movement. Both involved a race to move all of one's pieces along the winding track and off the board. And most importantly, both featured the same brilliant and aggressive tactical rule. A piece landing alone on a square was vulnerable to capture and being sent back to start, while two pieces together formed an impenetrable blockade. This shared rule set meant that a merchant from could sit down with an Egyptian official and immediately understand how to play, despite any language barrier. The game itself became a universal language of strategy and chance. We can actually trace the physical journey of this game through rare and fascinating archaeological finds. One of the most telling discoveries was an Aseb board etched onto the roof of the Great Temple at Kurna in Egypt. But it's a specific, personal artifact that truly makes the connection vivid, a beautiful, ornate gaming board found in a tomb at Thebes. This board is incredible because it is a hybrid. One side is laid out for the classic Egyptian game of Senet, a deeply spiritual native pastime, but flip it over, and you find the unmistakable 20-square pattern of the royal game of or Aseb. This double-sided board is like an ancient Swiss Army knife of fun, and it tells us that the Egyptian owner enjoyed both games. It shows a conscious adoption of a foreign game, not as a replacement for local traditions, but as a complementary addition to their leisure activities. This cultural exchange was almost certainly a two-way street facilitated by the elite. Wealthy Egyptian nobles and diplomats, stationed in foreign lands or hosting Mesopotamian traders, would have encountered this engaging new game. They would have been drawn to its sophisticated blend of luck and strategy, so different yet just as compelling as Senet. It's easy to imagine these games being played during diplomatic meetings or social gatherings, serving as both an icebreaker and a subtle way to gauge an opponent's strategic mind. Adopting this foreign game became a mark of sophistication, a way for an Egyptian noble to display their worldliness and connections to a wider, cosmopolitan world beyond the Nile. They weren't just playing a game, they were participating in an international craze. What's truly remarkable is how each culture then made the game its own. The Mesopotamians decorated their royal game of boards with intricate rosettes and symbols that held specific meanings in their own mythology and astronomy. The Egyptians, in turn, adapted the board by inscribing it with hieroglyphs or artistic motifs that resonated with their own aesthetic and possibly their spiritual beliefs. They kept the core engine of the game completely intact, the race, the capture, the blockades, but they placed their own cultural stamp on the presentation. This process shows a deep level of respect for the game's design while still asserting their own identity, a beautiful balance between global adoption and local customization that feels surprisingly modern. While the grand, ornate boards found in tombs tell us about the spiritual and elite life of ancient Egypt, a quieter, more humble set of discoveries reveals an entirely different world of play, the games of children. It appears that Egyptian youngsters were just as eager to play as kids today, and they often did so by mimicking the adults around them. They played adapted, simplified versions of popular games like Senet, using whatever materials they could find. Archaeologists have uncovered countless examples of game boards scratched directly into the stone floors of courtyards, the steps of temples, and even onto flat limestone flakes or broken pieces of pottery known as ostraka. These weren't professionally crafted sets. They were the ancient equivalent of doodles, etched by a child's hand during a moment of leisure, leaving a permanent mark of their childhood on the world. These improvised playing fields show a fascinating process of simplification. A full Senet board with its 30 squares and complex special symbols was likely too complicated for a young child. Instead, we find smaller grids, sometimes with as few as 10 or 12 squares, scratched into the stone. The rules were undoubtedly streamlined, focusing on the basic joy of moving pieces and the excitement of a race, stripping away the heavier spiritual symbolism of the adult version. The pieces themselves were equally makeshift. Instead of carved ebony cones or faience pawns, children would have used small pebbles, bits of broken pottery, or handfuls of nuts or seeds to mark their positions on these makeshift boards. This adaptation shows a universal truth of childhood. The drive to play is so powerful that it will always find a way, transforming any available space and object into a world of imagination and competition. Beyond these casual etchings, more formal evidence of childhood play has been found in the ruins of ordinary homes. Excavations of domestic areas have yielded beautifully crafted miniature game sets, complete with tiny playing pieces and minuscule throwing stick. These were not toys in the sense of being simplistic. They were fully functional, expertly made replicas of adult games, just scaled down for smaller hands. Finding these sets in household contexts, away from the grandeur of tombs, strongly suggests they were used by the entire family, including the children. It paints a tender picture of family life, parents perhaps teaching their children the rules of Senet, not just as a ritual practice for the afterlife, but as a way to spend a quiet evening together, fostering strategic thinking and family bonding through play. What these games reveal about childhood in ancient Egypt is profoundly moving. They show us that a child's world, though separated from ours by millennia, was in many ways strikingly familiar. Egyptian children experienced boredom and sought entertainment. They learned through imitation, watching their parents and older siblings and wanting to participate in the same activities. The presence of these games indicates that there was a recognized concept of childhood, a period of life where play was not only permitted, but was an integral part of development and socialization. These scratched boards and miniature sets are fleeting glimpses into their daily lives, telling us that the laughter of children, the excitement of a lucky throw, and the friendly squabbles over a game were as much a part of the ancient Egyptian soundscape as the chants of priests or the sound of commerce on the Nile. The materials used to craft these ancient games tell a story just as rich as the rules themselves, a clear reflection of the vast social divides within Egyptian society. For the vast majority of ordinary Egyptians, a game was a simple, improvised affair. A playing board might be nothing more than a grid of squares scratched into the dusty ground with a stick or carefully etched onto a flat, discarded piece of limestone or a broken chunk of pottery called an ostrek. Their game pieces were equally humble, a handful of smooth, river-worn pebbles of 2 different colors, a collection of broken pottery shards, or even just nuts, seeds, or dried beans. These makeshift sets required no wealth, only imagination, and they reveal a beautiful truth. The desire to play and connect was universal, transcending social class. You can easily imagine farmers taking a break in the shade of a palm grove, using such a simple setup to enjoy a quick, spirited game, their laughter echoing across the fields. Yet, for the elite, the pharaohs, nobles, and high-ranking officials, a game set was so much more than a pastime. It was a profound statement of power, wealth, and divine connection. These individuals commissioned sets that were exquisite works of art, crafted from the most luxurious and difficult-to-work materials available in the ancient world. The game pieces themselves were transformed from simple markers into miniature sculptures. Skilled artisans carved them from ebony, a dark, dense wood imported from distant lands to the south, and from elephant ivory, symbolizing a reach into far-flung trade networks. They were also masterfully cast from faience, a brilliantly glazed quartz ceramic that could be made in a stunning array of vibrant blues, greens, and whites, often meant to mimic precious turquoise and lapis lazuli. The shapes of these pieces offer a fascinating window into the Egyptian worldview. Instead of abstract cones or simple discs, we find an entire menagerie of intricate figures. There are lions and jackals, symbols of power and cunning, hippos and crocodiles, representing the chaotic forces of nature, and even human figures, often depicted as captive prisoners or soldiers, reflecting a theme of domination and control. Some of the most captivating pieces are those shaped like mythological creatures, such as the protective dwarf god Bes, who is associated with the household and good fortune. The level of detail on these tiny masterpieces is astounding, with individual feathers, facial expressions, and musculature carefully rendered by artisans whose names are lost to history, but whose skill remains eternally impressive. The quality of a game set, therefore, was a direct and unmistakable indicator of its owner's place in the social hierarchy. A beautifully carved ivory Senet set, inlaid with gold and semi-precious stones, was not merely for entertainment. It was a prized possession, a piece of funerary equipment essential for the afterlife journey, and a luxury item displayed prominently in the home to impress guests and reinforce the owner's exalted status. It spoke of access to rare materials, the means to commission master craftsmen, and the leisure time to engage in such sophisticated pursuits. This stark contrast in materials, from a pebble on a scratched stone to a glazed faience lion on an ebony board, beautifully illustrates the two ancient Egypts that coexisted, one of simple, pragmatic enjoyment, and another of immense wealth, artistic expression, and a deep, ritualistic connection to the gods and the afterlife. But beyond family fun and spiritual practice, there's compelling evidence that ancient Egyptian games had a more thrilling, high-stakes dimension: gambling. The competitive spirit that drives modern betting was clearly alive and well along the Nile, transforming a friendly board game into a pulse-pounding contest with real consequences. Some of the most telling clues come from tomb paintings, which were meant to depict an idealized version of daily life for the deceased to enjoy forever. In these vibrant scenes, we often see players hunched over their Senet or Aseb boards, their faces etched with concentration, but the detail that truly captures the imagination is what's placed beside them: neat stacks of goods, piles of rings, and what appear to be heaps of personal belongings. These aren't just casual decorations. Most Egyptologists agree these are wagers, the pot for which the players are competing. So what did an ancient Egyptian bet? The range was likely as vast as their society itself. For the common people, wagers probably involved everyday items that held immediate practical value. A farmer might gamble a measure of grain, a loaf of bread, or a few jars of beer. A craftsman could put his own work on the line: a finely woven basket, a new stone tool, or a piece of pottery. These were wagers of sustenance and livelihood, where a loss could mean a genuinely leaner week for a family. For those of higher status, the stakes grew accordingly. Tomb paintings show stacks of elaborate rings, likely made of precious metals, and bundles of clothing. It's easy to imagine nobles wagering bolts of fine linen, expensive alabaster jars filled with perfumed oil, or even valuable ingots of copper against each other during a tense game in a shaded courtyard. This culture of wagering reveals a fascinating social and economic layer to gaming. For many, it was likely a form of informal economic redistribution. A skilled player, through a combination of strategic acumen and favorable throws from the gods, could literally win their dinner or acquire a new tool without any bartering or coinage changing hands. The game board became a microeconomy, a volatile marketplace where fortune could smile or frown in an instant. It also added a powerful psychological element to play. Every move was amplified, every roll of the sticks laden with extra tension. The fear of losing a prized possession or the exhilaration of winning something valuable would have made these games incredibly immersive and emotionally charged experiences, far removed from the sedate, ritualistic play associated with the afterlife. Perhaps most interestingly, this practice may not have been viewed as a frivolous vice, but as a semi-legitimate test of divine favor. In a world where every outcome was believed to be influenced by the gods, a victory in a game of chance could be interpreted as a sign of approval or good fortune from deities like Thoth, the god of wisdom, or Bes, the protector of the household. A lucky streak might have been seen as a positive omen, while a loss could be rationalized as the will of the gods rather than a personal failing. This spiritual dimension provided a convenient cloak for the raw thrill of gambling, integrating it into a cultural framework where even a high-stakes bet could be framed as a way of communing with and understanding the whims of the divine. The profound connection between games and the afterlife in ancient Egypt reaches its most powerful expression in the objects themselves, carefully placed within the tomb to serve the deceased for eternity. Burying a Senet set was not a sentimental gesture. It was a vital provision, as essential as food, water, or protective amulets. Egyptians held a concrete belief that the afterlife was a physical reality, a demanding journey through the perilous duat, or underworld, filled with demons, traps, and divine judgments. The soul needed all the help it could get, and a Senet board was considered a crucial tool for navigating these challenges. It was a ritual object, a divine simulator that allowed the deceased to practice and ultimately succeed in the cosmic game that determined their eternal fate. This practice evolved dramatically over the centuries, reflecting changing religious beliefs. In the Old Kingdom, a beautifully crafted Senet board placed among the grave goods was sufficient. But as religious thought became more complex and democratic during the Middle and New Kingdoms, with more people aspiring to a blessed afterlife, the game's role intensified. We start to find game boards that are no longer just for play, they are transformed into sacred texts. The squares themselves become a canvas for religious inscription, often filled with hieroglyphs naming specific gods, protective spells, or excerpts from funerary texts like the Book of the Dead. Landing on a square inscribed with the name of Thoth, the god of wisdom, might magically grant the deceased his guidance, while a square marked with a demon's name would require a specific spell to overcome its obstacle. The ultimate expression of this belief is found in the so-called Book of the Game of Senet, a collection of texts and illustrations that explicitly map the game's 30 squares onto the soul's journey through the 12 hours of the night. While no single, complete rulebook has been found, these texts, often painted on papyrus or even directly onto coffin lids, provide a spiritual commentary. Each square correlated to a specific challenge or blessing in the duet. The dreaded House of Water square, for instance, was no longer just a gameplay hazard. It was the terrifying embodiment of the primordial waters of Nun, a force of chaos that could annihilate the unprepared soul. Successfully passing this square meant the deceased had magically overcome this existential threat. This spiritual dimension reveals that gaming was, in a very real sense, a form of active worship and preparation. Playing Senet in life was a pious act, a way to meditate on the nature of the soul, the will of the gods, and the challenges of the afterlife. It was an interactive dialogue with divinity, where the throw of the sticks represented the unpredictable will of the gods, and each move was a strategic prayer. The game became a microcosm of the universe, where order, known as Mat, battled chaos, known as Isfit. The player, by making skillful moves and receiving fortunate throws, was actively upholding cosmic order, proving their worthiness to the deities who would judge them. This belief system explains why some of the most elaborate and expensive game sets ever discovered come from tombs. Pharaohs like the young Tutankhamun were entombed with multiple sets, crafted from ebony, ivory, and gold, ensuring they had the best possible equipment for their journey. But it wasn't just for royalty. Middle-class officials and wealthy merchants also invested in fine Senet sets for their burial, indicating how widespread and deeply held this belief was across Egyptian society. The game was a universal key, a hope that through knowledge, ritual, and a bit of divine luck, any righteous person could achieve eternal life, turning a simple board game into the most serious and profound undertaking of their existence. No discovery better encapsulates the thrill of finding these ancient games than Howard Carter's first glimpse into the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. As he peered through a small hole into the antechamber, Lord Carnarvon anxiously asked if he could see anything. Carter's famous reply was, "Yes, wonderful things." And among the first of those wonderful things to catch the flickering candlelight were not just golden statues and jeweled chests, but gaming boards. The Boy King was sent into the afterlife with no fewer than 4 Senet sets, a clear indication of the game's supreme importance. One set in particular, found in the tomb's treasury, stands as a masterpiece of ancient craft. It's a stunning box that cleverly doubles as a playing board, with a drawer that stores the elegantly carved throwing sticks and pawns. The side of the box is even decorated with a scene showing Tutankhamun himself, playing Senet against an unseen opponent, perhaps his queen or even a god, reinforcing the belief that this was a ritual he would need to complete successfully in the afterlife. While the treasures of pharaohs capture the imagination, some of the most humanizing discoveries come from the places where ordinary people lived and worked. The ancient village of Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, is an archaeological treasure trove for understanding daily life. Here, in the ruins of these modest stone houses, archaeologists have found a staggering number of game boards. They are scratched into the paving stones of courtyards, carved into the flat surfaces of limestone flakes, and even etched onto the steps of the village shared chapels. These finds tell us that during their rest breaks from the physically demanding work of tomb construction, these skilled laborers would sit down for a quick game, using pebbles or bits of pottery as pieces. It's a powerful image that connects us directly to these people. After a long day of creating eternal masterpieces for a god-king, they sought the same simple relaxation we do today. More recent excavations continue to add new chapters to this story. In the 2000s, archaeologists working at the ancient Egyptian port of Mersa on the Red Sea coast made a remarkable find. While uncovering a man-made cave used for storage over 3,500 years ago, they discovered a series of game boards carved directly into the bedrock of the cave floor. Imagine those long-ago sailors, waiting for the right winds to sail on a trade mission to the fabled land of Punt, passing the time with a game in the dim cave light. This discovery proves that the urge to play traveled with Egyptians wherever they went, from the deepest valleys to the most remote outposts, turning any waiting period into an opportunity for a little competition and camaraderie. Each of these discoveries, from the gold inlaid sets of kings to the simple scratches of workers, adds a crucial piece to the puzzle of ancient Egyptian society. They reveal a culture that valued intellectual challenge and leisure at every level, from the divine pharaoh to the common laborer. A beautifully crafted senet set in a tomb speaks to profound spiritual beliefs, while a grid scratched into a rock step speaks to the universal human need for a moment of fun and connection. Together, they show us that ancient Egypt wasn't just a civilization of grand monuments and solemn rituals. It was also a world filled with the lively, familiar sounds of people laughing, strategizing, and rolling the dice, reminding us that across the vast gulf of time, we are not so very different after all. This fascinating work of historical reconstruction is a bit like assembling a massive, ancient jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces are missing. Egyptologists and game historians have to become master detectives, gathering every possible shred of evidence from wildly different sources, and then using logic, comparison, and sometimes just plain intuition to see how they might all fit together. It's a process filled with educated guesses, spirited debates, and the constant thrill of turning a fragmented mystery into a playable reality. The first and most crucial clues come from the physical artifacts themselves. The boards, pieces, and dice discovered in tombs and homes are the primary evidence. By carefully studying the wear patterns on a senet board, noting which squares are more deeply stained or polished from repeated contact, historians can make inferences about which spaces are most frequently landed on or were perhaps special in some way. The number of pieces in a set tells them how many each player likely controlled. The design of the pieces can hint at their movement. For instance, the peg-based pieces of Hounds and Jackals clearly fit into holes, indicating a track, while the flat, disc-shaped pawns of Senet suggest sliding along a smooth surface. Even the throwing sticks, with one side painted and the other plain, reveal the probable range of randomizers from 1 to 4, but physical objects can only tell us so much. This is where the rich visual record of ancient Egypt becomes invaluable. Tomb paintings and reliefs often depict people in the act of playing games. These scenes are more than just decoration, they are frozen moments in time. Experts scrutinize the body language of the players. Are they leaning forward intently, pointing at the board, celebrating? This can suggest the tension and excitement of the game. More importantly, these illustrations sometimes show the board from a revealing angle or depict the arrangement of pieces mid-game, offering a precious snapshot of gameplay that a static board alone cannot provide. A painting might show one player's hand hovering over a specific piece, hinting at a strategic choice, or depict the number of sticks in the air, confirming their use. The third pillar of this detective work is the written word, though it's often frustratingly indirect. There are no ancient Egyptian rulebooks titled How to Play Senet. Instead, historians scour religious texts, magical spells, and even literary stories for passing mentions of games. A text might metaphorically refer to a bad throw in a game when describing a misfortune, confirming the element of chance. Funerary texts, like the Book of the Dead, sometimes describe the afterlife journey using gaming terminology, equating certain squares on the Senet board with specific challenges in the duet. These symbolic descriptions, while not literal rules, provide a framework for understanding what the Egyptians believed was happening during a game, which in turn informs how the rules might have been structured. When the Egyptian evidence runs out, researchers look outward to neighboring cultures. This method of comparative analysis is incredibly powerful. Since we have a cuneiform tablet that details the rules for the Mesopotamian royal game of and we know the Egyptians played an identical game called Aseb, it is perfectly reasonable to use those rules as a foundational blueprint for how the Egyptian version was played. Similarly, many ancient games from the Mediterranean and Near East share core mechanics race formats, capturing, blocking, suggesting a common family of games. By understanding the rules of a known cousin, historians can make strong inferences about the rules of its Egyptian relative, adjusting for cultural differences revealed by art and artifacts. Finally, there is the hands-on approach of experimental archaeology. Scholars don't just theorize, they play. They take their best guess reconstruction of the rules and sit down with a replica board to test them. Does the game flow? Is it balanced? Does it last too long or end too quickly? Does it create the kind of exciting back and forth drama that would explain its enduring popularity? If a proposed rule set leads to constant stalemates or feels unsatisfying, it's probably wrong. The goal is to find a set of rules that feel right, that are engaging, strategic, and align with all the physical, artistic, and textual evidence. This process of playtesting is what transforms a dry academic theory into a living, breathing game that we can understand and enjoy today, closing a loop that was started thousands of years ago along the banks of the Nile. The incredible detective work of historians has done more than just solve ancient mysteries. It has opened a door, allowing us to step back in time and actually play these games ourselves. Today, you can walk into a museum gift shop or go online and purchase a beautifully crafted replica of Senet or the royal game of These modern recreations are the direct result of decades of painstaking research, a collaboration between Egyptologists, woodworkers, and game designers who are passionate about bringing history to life. They aren't just souvenirs, they are functional pieces of history built using the best available interpretations of the original rules. For a modern player, there's a unique thrill in sliding pawns across a board modeled after Tutankhamun's own set, connecting with an ancient opponent across millennia through the shared experience of strategy and chant. Some of these ancient designs have proven to be astonishingly modern in their appeal. The royal game of with its clear rules recovered from a cuneiform tablet, plays with the tense, tactical feel of backgammon. Its blend of luck and aggressive strategy is instantly familiar and deeply engaging, explaining why it became an international hit 4,000 years ago and why it can still hold its own on a game night today. Similarly, the race and capture mechanics of Hounds and Jackals translate perfectly, offering a light, fast-paced experience that's easy to learn and perfect for families. These games feel timeless because they tap into fundamental elements of play: the excitement of a chase, the satisfaction of a clever capture, and the drama of a last-minute comeback fueled by a lucky roll. Yet, other games remain stubbornly enigmatic, their full secrets still locked away. Mehen, the Serpent game, is the prime example. While beautiful replica boards with their lion and marble pieces are available, no one can say for certain how it's truly played. The rules are a blank slate, leading modern historians and game enthusiasts to propose their own theories. Some suggest it was a cooperative game where players worked together to get their pieces to the center, while others imagine a competitive race or a complex battle game. This ambiguity has turned Mehen into a fascinating playground for experimental archaeology. At museum events and historical reenactments, you might see volunteers demonstrating several different possible rule sets, each offering a distinct and thought-provoking experience. Playing Mehen today is less about rediscovering a fixed game and more about participating in an ongoing conversation with the past, experimenting with possibilities, and glimpsing the creative mind of the ancient Egyptians. Watching people engage with these games at living history museums is a revelation. You see the same range of human emotions that must have existed thousands of years ago: the intense concentration of a player calculating their next move in Senet, the triumphant grin after a successful capture in Aseb, and the groans of frustration when a throw of the sticks sends a piece tumbling back to the start. These demonstrations prove that the core mechanics these ancient inventors stumbled upon are fundamentally sound. The risk-reward of leaving a piece unprotected, the strategic joy of building a blockade, the shared laughter when luck defies all strategy, these moments are universal. They transcend the specifics of culture and era, revealing a direct line from an Egyptian scribe relaxing after a long day to a modern family gathered around a kitchen table. So why do these mechanics still resonate so powerfully? It's because the ancient Egyptians, perhaps without even realizing it, were masterful game theorists. They understood that the perfect balance for lasting engagement lies in blending skill with chance. The element of luck, provided by throws of the dice or sticks, levels the playing field. It means a novice can occasionally beat an expert, keeping hope alive and every game feeling winnable until the very last moment. Meanwhile, the strategic depth gives a skilled player a consistent edge, rewarding careful planning and tactical thinking. This combination creates a dynamic, emotionally engaging experience that is never the same twice. It's a formula that game designers still use today because it speaks to something essential in us: the desire to test our minds against uncertainty and against each other, to find meaning and joy in the structured chaos of a game. While the spiritual significance of these games was profound, their role as markers of social standing was equally powerful within the bustling, hierarchical world of ancient Egypt. The quality of a gaming set served as an immediate and unmistakable public declaration of wealth, taste, and access to resources. For the pharaoh and his inner circle, a game was far more than a simple diversion. It was an opportunity for lavish display. The most exquisite sets were masterpieces of the artisan's craft, constructed from materials that were exotic, difficult to work, and incredibly expensive. Imagine a Senet board crafted from fragrant ebony, imported from the distant lands of Nubia, its dark surface inlaid with swirling patterns of ivory and gleaming electrum. The playing pieces might be sculpted from lapis lazuli, turquoise, and carnelian, each tiny pawn a precious jewel in its own right. These were not merely toys, but treasured possessions, often recorded in official inventories of a noble's estate, highlighting their value alongside chariots, lands, and servants. This display of status extended beyond static ownership into the very rituals of social life. Elaborate tomb paintings from the New Kingdom period provide a window into these elite gatherings, depicting sophisticated banquet scenes where gaming is a central activity. We see a nobleman and his wife, adorned in fine linen and elaborate wigs, reclining on chairs while engaged in a tense game of Senet or Aseb. Attendants stand by with refreshments, and musicians play softly in the background. In these depictions, the game is not a solitary pastime, but a performance of sophistication and leisure. To have the time to master complex strategy games and to own such magnificent sets to play them on was a clear signal that one existed far above the realm of manual labor and daily subsistence. It was a non-verbal language of power, communicating refinement, wealth, and a privileged place in the cosmic and social order ordained by the gods. The contrast with the gaming experiences of the common majority could not be more stark. For a farmer, a laborer, or a craftsperson, ownership of a finely crafted ivory set was an impossible dream. Their version of the same games was played on a grid hastily scratched into a flat patch of earth, on the stone step of a house, or on a cheap, crudely made wooden board. Their pieces were likely pebbles, broken pot shards, or knucklebones. Yet the important fact is that they still played. This tells us that the games themselves, and the social interaction they fostered, held a universal appeal that transcended class boundaries. The difference lay entirely in the medium, not the message. A noble's gold inlaid Senet set and a worker's pebbles on a dirt grid were both portals to the same world of challenge, camaraderie, and escape, but one was also a powerful symbol that reinforced the vast economic divides of their society. This hierarchy was even mirrored in the journey to the afterlife. A pharaoh like Tutankhamun was buried with multiple opulent game sets to ensure his eternal leisure and successful passage through the Jewett. A wealthy official might have one fine Senet board included among his grave goods, but a commoner, they would have to rely on a simple, painted representation on a coffin lid, or the hope that the ritual knowledge of the game alone would be enough to secure safe passage. The object itself, or its absence, was a final, lasting testament to the station they held in life, forever frozen in the archaeological record. From the glittering courts of Thebes to the modest homes of Deir el-Medina, the humble board game served as a perfect mirror, reflecting the immense social stratification of ancient Egypt, while simultaneously providing a rare and cherished common ground for human connection across all levels of its civilization. This focus on elite pastimes might paint a picture of gaming as an exclusively male domain, a common assumption about the ancient world, but the archaeological evidence from Egypt tells a very different and surprisingly modern story. Far from being sidelined, women were active and enthusiastic participants in the world of play, a fact immortalized in the art they left behind. One of the most famous and intimate depictions comes from the tomb of the Middle Kingdom official Idi, where we see him and his wife intimately engaged in a game of Hounds and Jackals. She is not a passive observer, she is a full participant, her hand outstretched, caught in the moment of making a move, her concentration a mirror of her husband's. This scene is not an anomaly. From the New Kingdom, we have the beautiful tomb painting of Nefertari, the beloved great wife of Ramesses II, depicted playing Senet alone, a vision of serene contemplation and strategic thought. These images are powerful statements, showing women not just present at the gaming table, but fully absorbed in the intellectual challenge and enjoyment of the game. This artistic evidence is backed up powerfully by the objects found in their final resting places. Just as men were buried with their favorite game sets to provide entertainment for eternity, so too were women. Archaeologists have uncovered beautifully crafted Senet boards and pieces within the burial chambers of wealthy women, high priestesses, and royal wives. This practice confirms that gaming was not a frivolous distraction for them, but an integral part of their identity and a valued activity they expected to continue in the afterlife. The inclusion of these games signifies that strategic thinking and the mastery of complex rules were considered admirable qualities for women, attributes worthy of carrying into the divine realm. It shatters the simplistic notion that ancient women were solely concerned with domestic spheres. Their leisure pursuits involve the same sophisticated games that challenge the minds of men. Within the rigid hierarchy of ancient Egyptian society, games provided a unique and valuable social space for women, particularly among the elite. In a culture where public life was often dominated by men, the semi-private setting of a home or garden offered a venue for female camaraderie and competition. We can easily imagine scenes of noblewomen gathering, their attendants nearby, as they engaged in intense matches of Senet or Aseb. These games would have been a catalyst for conversation, gossip, and social bonding, a way to build and maintain important personal networks. For royal women, playing a game could also be a means of engaging in diplomacy, building rapport with foreign delegates or the wives of officials through a shared, neutral activity that transcended formal court protocols. The game board became a microcosm of society where women could exercise agency, demonstrate intelligence, and navigate social dynamics on their own terms. So what does all this tell us about gender roles in ancient Egypt? The prominent presence of women in gaming culture suggests a society that, while undoubtedly patriarchal, allowed for a significant degree of female autonomy and intellectual recognition. Egyptian women could own and manage property, initiate divorce, and serve in powerful religious roles. Their participation in complex strategy games fits perfectly within this framework of relative social capability. A woman skilled at Senet was not just passing the time, she was demonstrating strategic foresight, an understanding of probability, and a competitive spirit, all qualities that were valued in the wider world. Gaming, therefore, becomes a lens through which we see a more nuanced picture of gender relations. It reveals a culture where the intellectual and social lives of women were acknowledged, respected, and even celebrated, providing them with a recognized outlet for skills that extended far beyond the home and into the realms of ritual, strategy, and social power. Just as the Nile River itself constantly shifted its course over the centuries, so too did the landscape of Egyptian gaming evolve across its 3,000-year history, reflecting the immense political, social, and religious changes that shaped this remarkable civilization. In the very earliest periods, the predynastic era before the first pharaohs united the land, we find the most primal evidence of play, simple grids scratched into rock outcrops. These primordial boards, often just a few rows of holes or squares, suggest games that were likely pure races of chance, perhaps used for simple divination or as a pastime during quiet moments. There was no elaborate symbolism yet. These were the foundational building blocks, the humble origins from which a rich gaming culture would eventually grow. The real flourishing began with the dawn of the dynastic era and the Old Kingdom, a time of powerful, godlike pharaohs and the construction of the Great Pyramids. It was during this age of absolute royal authority and a highly centralized state religion that we see the first golden age of Egyptian games, particularly the rise of Senet and Mehen. Senet began its journey, evolving from a simple pastime into a tool for religious expression. The boards from this period start to show the first special symbols on the final squares, indicating a growing connection to solar mythology and the afterlife. Simultaneously, the serpentine coils of Mehen reached the peak of their popularity, its imagery of protection and cosmic order perfectly mirroring the state-sponsored religion centered on the sun god Ra and the invincible power of the divine king. Gaming in the Old Kingdom was deeply entwined with the cosmic struggle between order and chaos, a concept that underpinned the pharaoh's very right to rule. This stable, insular world shattered with the collapse of the Old Kingdom, leading to the First Intermediate Period, a chaotic era of political fragmentation and social upheaval. And the world of games changed with it. The sophisticated, cosmically aligned game of Mehen, so tied to the old royal ideology, vanished completely from the archaeological record, a stunning disappearance that speaks volumes about its role as a relic of a lost theological order. In its place, Senet continued to thrive, but began its profound transformation into the definitive guide to the afterlife for the individual. As the state religion faltered, people became more focused on their own personal salvation, and the game's rules and symbolism expanded to meet this new, more democratic spiritual anxiety. It was no longer just the pharaoh who needed to navigate the duet. Now, everyone did. The subsequent reunification of Egypt in the Middle Kingdom ushered in a new era of refined culture and international contact, and this is vividly reflected in the gaming habits of the time. The beloved race game, Hounds and Jackals, exploded in popularity across all social classes. Its lighthearted, competitive nature seems to have perfectly suited the more pragmatic and commercially energetic mood of the period. Elaborate sets were crafted for the elite, while simpler versions were enjoyed by everyone else. Furthermore, this era of renewed trade and diplomacy saw the first major importation of foreign games, most notably the precursor to Aseb, or the 20 squares game, which likely entered Egypt through contact with Levantine traders. The Egyptian appetite for new challenges was growing, and they were eager to adopt and adapt intriguing games from beyond their borders. This trend of international exchange accelerated dramatically during the New Kingdom, when Egypt became a vast, expansionist empire stretching from Nubia to Syria. The wealth flowing into Thebes funded an unprecedented age of luxury, and gaming sets became more opulent than ever before, crafted from ebony, ivory, and gold. But more importantly, the constant interaction with conquered territories and trade partners led to a full-blown gaming renaissance. The Mesopotamian royal game of which the Egyptians called Aseb, was fully embraced by the elite. We find stunning hybrid boards Senet on one side, Aseb on the other, showing that Egyptians happily enjoyed both their native spiritual game and this exciting new foreign import. The rules of Aseb, with its aggressive captures and strategic blockades, offered a different kind of intellectual thrill, one that reflected the more complex, interconnected, and perhaps more mercantile world of the empire. Finally, in the late periods of Egyptian history, including under the rule of foreign powers like the Ptolemies and Romans, the gaming scene became a true melting pot. Traditional Egyptian games like Senet persisted, but they now shared the table with a whole host of classical imports. The Greeks brought their game of Peteia, a game of military tactics, and the Romans introduced La Trunculi and eventually Tabula, a direct ancestor of backgammon. You can see this cultural fusion in the archaeological record. We find Roman-style dice made of bone and glass alongside traditional Egyptian throwing sticks, all in the same context. Gaming in these final centuries of ancient Egyptian civilization became less about preparing for a specifically Egyptian afterlife and more a reflection of a cosmopolitan, globalized Mediterranean world, where a Greek merchant in Alexandria might challenge an Egyptian priest to a game that had its origins on the banks of the Tiber River. The vibrant artwork adorning the walls of tombs and temples provides our most direct window into how these games were woven into the daily fabric of ancient Egyptian life. These aren't merely decorative scenes, they are frozen moments in time, capturing the intensity, the social context, and the profound cultural weight of a good game. One of the most intimate and famous of these depictions is found in the tomb of Queen Nefertari, the beloved wife of Ramesses II. There, she is portrayed not as a distant, formal ruler, but as a woman deeply engaged in thought, seated before her Senate board. She is alone, playing against an unseen opponent, who many Egyptologists interpret as a deity or perhaps her own spirit. This solitary game is a powerful statement. It tells us that Senet was not always a loud, social competition. It could also be a deeply personal, meditative ritual, a form of active prayer and preparation for the solitary journey she would one day undertake through the underworld. Moving from the royal to the relatable, the tomb of the Middle Kingdom official Idi offers a completely different, yet equally illuminating, snapshot. His tomb painting shows him and his wife seated closely together, fully absorbed in a game of hounds and jackals. Their body language is unmistakable, leaning forward, hands outstretched over the board, their faces etched with concentration. This scene radiates the familiar energy of a friendly yet intense marital rivalry. It tells us that games were a common domestic entertainment, a way for couples to connect, compete, and share leisure time. The presence of such a scene in a tomb, meant to depict an idealized version of life for eternity, confirms that this shared enjoyment was considered a fundamental part of a happy, fulfilled existence, worthy of being carried into the afterlife. Beyond showing us who played, these artistic representations provide crucial clues about how they played. Illustrations often show the number of casting sticks in midair, confirming their use as randomizers. The arrangement of pieces on a board in a painting can offer a rare glimpse into a mid-game situation, allowing historians to reverse engineer possible moves and strategies. The objects placed beside the players are equally telling. In many scenes, we see stacks of rings, piles of food, and other goods next to the board. These are almost certainly wagers, the pots for which these high-stakes games were played. This turns a simple depiction of play into a commentary on economics and social interaction, showing that games could be a medium for the redistribution of wealth, or at least for winning a night's worth of beer and bread. The significance of these games also extended into the realm of literature and wisdom texts, where they served as powerful metaphors. In a famous literary work known as the Satire of the Trades, which contrasts the difficult life of a soldier with other professions, the author uses a gaming analogy to describe the uncertainty of fate. He writes that a man's life is like a throw with the knuckle bones, entirely subject to chance. This wasn't a casual comparison. It drew upon a universal experience understood by all Egyptians, from the pharaoh to the farmer. The random throw of the dice or sticks was the perfect symbol for the unpredictable will of the gods and the capricious nature of fortune itself. Furthermore, the language of gaming permeated religious texts concerned with the afterlife. The Book of the Dead and other funerary guides describe the soul's perilous journey through the Jewett using terminology directly lifted from games like Senet. The various challenges demons to answer, gates to pass, watery abysses to avoid are framed as squares on a cosmic game board that the deceased must successfully navigate. This metaphorical use elevates the game from a simple pastime to a conceptual framework for understanding the universe. It shows that the Egyptians saw their existence as a kind of divine game, where the soul was a player moving through a predetermined set of challenges, its success dependent on a combination of moral purity, knowledge of the right spells, and ultimately the favor of the gods, much like a fortunate roll of the dice. Through art and literature, we see that board games were more than entertainment. They were a lens through which the Egyptians interpreted everything from marital harmony to the very nature of destiny and the divine. Beneath the beautifully carved boards and animal-headed pieces lay a hidden layer of intellectual sophistication that rivals many modern games. The ancient Egyptians, though they left behind no formal mathematical texts on probability, were undoubtedly intuitive masters of chance and strategic calculation. Consider the simple act of throwing the 4 flat sticks used in Senet. With one side painted and the other plain, the possible outcomes were 1, 2, 3, or 4 painted sides facing up, with a distinct probability for each result. A throw of 1 had the highest chance of occurring, while a roll of 4 was the rarest. Players would have developed a deep, innate understanding of these odds over countless games, learning to weigh the risk of moving a vulnerable piece versus the potential reward of a large advance. This wasn't just random luck. It was a constant, subconscious calculation of risk versus reward, a fundamental principle of both ancient gaming and modern probability theory. This mathematical thinking extended into the strategic placement of pieces on the board. In Senet, the decision of which piece to move was never trivial. Do you advance a lone piece deep into the dangerous final squares, risking it being sent back by a hazard or an opponent's move, or you focus on moving a piece that is part of a protective blockade, sacrificing progress for security? This required players to think several moves ahead, anticipating not only their own future throws, but also the potential moves of their opponent. It was a dynamic puzzle of resource management, where their resources were their limited pieces and the precious spaces on the board. Each turn presented a branching tree of possibilities, and skilled players would have learned to evaluate the best path based on the current state of the game, a cognitive process that is the very essence of strategic planning. It's highly plausible that these games served as informal but powerful educational tools, especially for the elite. For a scribe or an official in the pharaoh's administration, the skills honed over a Senet board were directly transferable to their duties. The game taught logical sequencing, the evaluation of competing options, and the management of assets under conditions of uncertainty, all vital skills for organizing a labor force, calculating rations for an expedition, or planning the logistics of a building project. A father teaching his son the nuanced rules of Aseb, with its captures and safe blocks, was simultaneously giving him a lesson in tactical thinking and risk assessment. In a society without formal schools for these subjects, the game board became a classroom where abstract mathematical and strategic concepts were made tangible and engaging through play. This ancient strategic thought finds startling parallels in modern game theory, a field of mathematics that studies decision-making in competitive situations. While the Egyptians didn't formalize these concepts into theorems, they were certainly playing them out. The aggressive move in Aseb of capturing an opponent's lone piece is a classic zero-sum game strategy. A move that directly harms your opponent's position is equivalent to improving your own. The decision to create a blockade with 2 pieces making a square invulnerable, is a form of strategic coordination, ensuring a defensive advantage. Even the spiritual journey of Senet mirrors a probabilistic decision tree, where the player must navigate a path filled with chance events, the throws and predictable outcomes, the special squares, constantly updating their strategy based on new information. These players were, in effect, pioneering the same core ideas that mathematicians would later define centuries, exploring Nash equilibria and minimax strategies not on a blackboard, but on a board of ebony and ivory. The enduring brilliance of these designs lies in their perfect balance between luck and skill. The element of chance, governed by the throw of the sticks, ensured that no player, no matter how inexperienced, was ever permanently out of the game. A fortunate series of rolls could allow a novice to challenge a master, keeping the game exciting and unpredictable. This randomness represented the unknowable will of the gods, a force that could uplift or humble anyone at any moment. Yet simultaneously, the layer of strategic depth rewarded careful planning, pattern recognition, and experience. A master player couldn't control the dice, but they could optimize their moves to capitalize on good fortune and minimize the damage of bad luck. This delicate equilibrium is the holy grail of game design, a formula that the Egyptians mastered millennia ago and that continues to define the most engaging games we play today, from backgammon to Settlers of Catan. Their creations were not merely pastimes, they were elegant systems for exploring the eternal dance between fate and free will, between chaos and order, providing a timeless intellectual challenge that continues to captivate us. So what happened to these incredible games that were so deeply woven into the fabric of ancient Egyptian life for thousands of years? Their disappearance wasn't the result of a single event, but a slow, complex fading driven by a perfect storm of foreign influence, profound religious upheaval, and the simple, universal human desire for something new. The first major blow was the series of foreign invasions that began toward the end of Egypt's new kingdom. As successive waves of Libyans, Nubians, and most significantly, the Persians under Cambyses II conquered the Nile Valley, they brought with them their own customs, their own gods, and crucially, their own game. The new ruling classes had little interest in preserving the intricate spiritual rituals embedded in a game like Senet, which was tied to a very specific Egyptian conception of the afterlife. Their patronage shifted, and without the support of the elite, the very people who commissioned the finest artisanal sets and ensured their place in tombs, the cultural importance of these native games began to erode from the top down. This external pressure catalyzed an even more powerful internal shift, a fundamental transformation in Egyptian religious beliefs. The core spiritual engine of games like Senet and Mehen was a cosmology centered on the sun god Ra and a perilous journey through a very Egyptian underworld. But as the empire fractured and foreign ideas flooded in, this worldview began to change. The rise of cults devoted to gods like Isis and Osiris, which offered a more personal and accessible path to salvation, made the complex board-based rehearsal for the duet seem less relevant. The final, decisive nail in the coffin was the official conversion of Egypt to Christianity under the Roman Empire. This new faith actively discouraged its followers from engaging in practices it deemed pagan, and the old gods, along with the games that served them, were systematically purged from public life. The deeply religious function of these games, which had been their greatest strength for millennia, ultimately became their greatest vulnerability in a rapidly changing spiritual landscape. On a more practical level, people simply found new ways to play. The Greeks and Romans introduced a host of exciting new games that captured the public's imagination. The Romans, in particular, brought tabula, a direct ancestor of backgammon that was faster paced, easier to learn, and used exciting six-sided dice instead of simple throwing sticks. In the face of this new competition, the older, more ritualistic Egyptian games began to seem slow, esoteric, and old-fashioned. Imagine the societal shift. The sophisticated, cosmically significant game of Senet, which would take hours to complete and required a deep understanding of its symbolism, was now competing with a quick, gambling-focused game of chance that you could play in a tavern in a single sitting. Cultural tastes evolved, and the ancient games failed to adapt. gradually relegated to the backwaters of society and then forgotten entirely, the physical disintegration of Egyptian society itself played a crucial role. The economic and political instability that followed the fall of the New Kingdom led to a decline in the skilled artisan classes who crafted the beautiful game sets. Production of luxury items like ivory and ebony boards plummeted. Furthermore, the practice of filling tombs with elaborate grave goods, a tradition that had preserved so many of these games for archaeology, slowly died out. As the old ways of honoring the dead changed, one of the key mechanisms for preserving this aspect of material culture vanished. The knowledge of how to play these games was part of an oral tradition passed down from generation to generation. When that chain was broken by social collapse, the rules, the strategies, and the very reasons for playing were silenced, leaving behind only silent boards whose meaning was now a locked secret. The disappearance of these games is a powerful lesson in the fragility of cultural memory. It shows us that even traditions that persist for longer than the entire history of the Roman Empire can be utterly erased within a few generations. Their loss reminds us that culture is not a monolithic, unchanging thing, but a dynamic, living process that requires active participation and transmission to survive. The echoes of these games did not completely vanish. The strategic concepts of capture and blockade lived on in other forms, and the human love for a roll of the dice never faded. But the specific, beautiful, and profound world of Egyptian play was a casualty of history, a reminder that understanding the past often involves piecing together not just what survived, but grappling with the immense silence of what was lost. Thankfully, the story of these ancient games doesn't end with their disappearance. A passionate global effort is now underway to rescue them from obscurity, to carefully lift them from the silent displays of museum cases and breathe life back into them for a new generation to enjoy. This revival is happening on multiple fronts, each one crucial for reconnecting us with this lost chapter of human creativity. Major museums around the world have moved beyond simply exhibiting these beautiful objects as static artifacts. Institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the British Museum in London, and of course, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo are now creating interactive exhibits where visitors can not only see a 4,000-year-old Senet board, but actually sit down at a replica and play it. These hands-on experiences are transformative. They shift our perspective from seeing a game as a mere curiosity to understanding it as a dynamic system of rules and choices, allowing us to feel a direct, tactile connection to the ancient mind that devised it. This work is powered by the dedicated scholarship of Egyptologists, historians, and game designers who collaborate to turn archaeological clues into playable rule sets. Their research is painstaking, comparing fragments of text, analyzing tomb paintings for hints on piece movement, and even using modern statistical models to test the probability of different throwing stick outcomes. The fruits of their labor are now widely accessible. You can find meticulously researched rulebooks for Senet and the Royal Game of online, and a number of specialty board game companies produce historically accurate replica sets crafted from wood, stone, and fans. This has created a wonderful community of enthusiasts, history buffs, board game geeks, and educators who gather at conventions, in online forums, and at historical reenactment events to play these games, sharing strategies and experiences as if they were the latest modern release, despite their millennia-old pedigree. In Egypt itself, this revival is taking on a powerful new dimension as a tool for cultural education and national pride. Schools and cultural centers are beginning to incorporate ancient games into their curricula, teaching children about their own heritage not through dusty textbooks, but through active participation. Imagine a classroom in Cairo where students learn about pharaonic religious beliefs by playing a round of Senet, discussing how the House of Water square reflects ancient fears of chaos, or exploring geometric patterns by constructing their own Mehen board. This approach makes history tangible and exciting, fostering a deeper, more personal connection to the past. It allows young Egyptians to engage with their ancestry not as a distant, static monument, but as a living, breathing culture that laughed, thought, and played. Beyond the classroom, these games are also becoming a unique attraction for the culturally curious traveler. Tourist sites and luxury Nile cruises are now offering ancient game nights, where visitors can unwind after a day of exploring temples by learning to play Hounds and Jackals under the stars, much as the ancients might have done. This isn't just a gimmick, it's a form of immersive HISTORICAL Chinese letter that provides a more holistic and humanized view of ancient Egypt. It moves beyond the awe of monumental architecture and invites us to share a moment of common humanity with the people who built it, recognizing that their need for leisure and intellectual challenge was just as strong as our own. What makes this global revival so profound is the universal lesson these games teach us about human nature. They are a powerful testament to the fact that the drive to play, to create structured systems of rules and competition, is a fundamental human constant, as essential as our need for storytelling or art. The ancient Egyptians, separated from us by thousands of years and vastly different beliefs, nonetheless sat down and crafted experiences that we can still understand and enjoy today. We feel the same thrill they did when a risky move pays off, the same frustration when an unlucky roll sends us back to the start, and the same satisfaction of a well-executed strategy. This shared language of play transcends time, language, and culture, reminding us of our common humanity. Ultimately, the preservation of these ancient games is about more than just saving rules from oblivion. It's about safeguarding a crucial aspect of our collective intellectual heritage. Every time we roll the dice in a game of Senet, we are participating in a tradition that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. We are honoring the incredible creativity and ingenuity of our ancestors, who with simple materials, wood, stone, and bone created complex worlds of meaning and challenge. These games remind us that human creativity is not a linear progression, but a vast, interconnected web. By keeping these ancient games alive, we ensure that the playful, strategic, and profoundly human spirit of their inventors is never forgotten, celebrating the enduring power of play to connect us across the immense expanse of centuries. From the spiritual journey of Senet to the cosmic mystery of Mehen, and from the frantic race of hounds and jackals to the international appeal of Aseb, the sheer diversity and sophistication of ancient Egyptian board games is nothing short of breathtaking. These weren't mere child's play, they were a profound expression of an entire civilization's worldview, masterfully blending strategy and chance, the sacred and the social, into a format that could be enjoyed by a farmer on a break and a pharaoh in his palace. They connected the grand, cosmic fears about the afterlife to the simple, everyday human desire for connection, competition, and a moment of fun. This incredible legacy shows us a side of ancient Egypt that is often hidden behind the grandeur of pyramids and golden masks, a living, breathing culture that thought deeply, laughed heartily, and found meaning in the roll of the dice and the move of a piece. The great news is that this world of ancient play isn't closed to us. Thanks to the dedicated work of historians and archaeologists, we can actually step into this past. Reconstructed versions of these games are available, and playing them is one of the most direct and engaging ways to connect with history. There's a unique thrill in holding replica throwing sticks, moving a piece shaped like a lion, and experiencing the same strategic dilemmas and lucky breaks that an Egyptian would have known thousands of years ago. It transforms our understanding from something academic into something visceral and personal. You can find beautifully crafted sets online or even make your own simple version. All you need is a grid drawn on paper and a handful of coins for pieces to begin your own adventure into the ancient world. So we'd love to hear from you. After this journey through the forgotten games of the Nile, which one captured your imagination the most? Would you choose the profound spiritual challenge of Senet, navigating the perils of the duat for eternal life? Or perhaps the mysterious, coiled path of Mehen, guiding your lion pieces across the serpent's back in a game whose true rules are still a tantalizing mystery? Maybe the fast-paced, tactical race of hounds and jackals is more your style, or the aggressive, backgammon-like strategy of Aseb. Let us know in the comments below which ancient game you'd most like to play and why. Your thoughts and curiosity are what make exploring these hidden histories so rewarding. Thank you for joining us on this adventure. And as always, until next time, keep exploring.